everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks. I'm thrilled you can join us today. You know, June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, just in case you haven't known. So you're probably going to see a lot of information pumping out this month, which is great. And I am so thrilled with our guest that we're having today. She's from Australia, and she has lived the journey. She's a doctor, and she is just filled with great resources. And I will introduce you shortly to her. But I do want to encourage people to go and visit alzheimerspeaks.com. Click on our free resources. We have a ton of them. We've been curating things since 2009. So there's just a wide variety of things that you can use as tools, things you can participate in, share, get involved with. So again, just go to alzheimerspeaks.com. You can also visit our global resource directory, dementiamap.com, which, both are free to access the information there. And if you have services, products, or tools and want to get involved with that, you can reach out to me or just go to the site, dementiamap.com. You'll find more information on that. I really want to give a shout out to Twiddle. They have some great products that really help when people are feeling agitated, or it could be sad or fidgety. It can really help with sundowning. So go to the number 4 and then twiddles.com, and you'll find more information out about them. So let's go ahead and introduce you to our guest today, because we are going to be talking about how dementia is no match for a daughter's determination. Well, Helena, I am so excited that we are finally doing this show. I was thrilled to be able to meet with you the other day. For our audience, you probably don't know this, but she is from Australia, and I'm in Minnesota in the U.S., so it was just such a pleasure to be able to have lunch with her and get to know her on a whole nother level. And I know that you are going to love this interview, because she is just filled with passion and hope and wonderful tips and insights that are going to help you. So, Helena, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time to be with us.
It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to be speaking with you. I'm really excited.
Well, me too. I'm going to have you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, well, as you said, I'm an Australian. I'm a family physician, and I am passionate about showing people how to boost their brain so they can perform at their peak throughout their life. They can avoid the brain fog in menopause, and they can not get dementia as they age. And I do that through education, not medication. I believe that our decisions are more powerful than our DNA, than our genes, than our diagnoses, and that we can all grow bolder rather than older.
I love that. You have lots of great sound bites there. The bolder versus older, and the education versus medication. Those are wonderful, because they're easy for people to remember, and they're just really powerful statements. Now, our title today is Dementia is No Match for a Daughter's Determination. So you've been touched by dementia yourself. You want to give us a little insight, and then we'll dive a little deeper as we talk?
Yes, I was very unexpectedly thrown into the role of caring for my father 14 years ago. Not long after my mother passed away with lung cancer, I happened to find a box of the medication rivastigmine in the butter compartment of my parents' fridge. Now, rivastigmine, it has several brand names like Dinazepam, Exelon. It's what's known as a cholinesterase inhibitor. It's a drug that reduces the breakdown of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, which is sometimes prescribed in the early stages of Alzheimer's to temporarily slow worsening of symptoms. Now, I didn't know anyone who had Alzheimer's, so I asked my father who these patches were for, so it's applied to the skin. And he says, oh, your mother said they were good for my memory, so I stick one on every night. I don't know that they do much, but as long as I took them, happy wife, peaceful life. That was how I first learned that Dad had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I'd been living 600 miles from my parents, and I only moved back to care for Mum after she'd been diagnosed with lung cancer. So I'd assumed that Dad's, yes, he was depressed, withdrawn, forgetful, confused, but I thought they were all manifestations of grief at losing Mum. So I tracked down Dad's GP, and sure enough, he confirmed the diagnosis of dementia. And such was the stigma around dementia in my Serbian family of origin that my parents hadn't even told their only child, their devoted daughter, who also happened to be a doctor, i.e. me, that her father had Alzheimer's. And in fact, Mum hadn't even told Dad his diagnosis because his mother, my paternal grandmother, had died of Alzheimer's, and Dad swore he'd throw himself off a cliff near our home if he were ever diagnosed himself. And so neither Mum nor I, when I found out, were prepared to call his bluff. So I never told him his diagnosis, and we only spoke about, yes, his memory could do with a bit of improvement.
Wow, what a shock. What did that do to you just emotionally? I can't imagine, because I think of my folks hid stuff from me. I mean, I knew about the diagnosis, but there were other things, that they would hide so that they would have their independence and things. And in some ways, it made me sit back and it made me feel like our relationship was crippled, because I thought we were so close, and I couldn't believe some of the stuff that they hid. Though, I learned during the journey that it was more of they were trying to protect their dignity type deal. It wasn't anything like that they didn't trust me, but that's how I kind of took it at first. How did you take it?
I think it was my mother protecting me. She didn't want to burden her daughter. She was handling everything. And for a long time, I kept waking up thinking, hoping that it was a dream. I just couldn't believe it for a long time. I think because what shocked me the most was how little I knew about Alzheimer's, even as a doctor, that there was so little we had been taught. Basically, what I'd been taught in medical school was to tell patients to get their affairs in order because there's nothing we can do and things will only get worse. And I thought, no, that when I was personally touched, I thought that can't be right. So I did a very deep dive into all the research that was available and found that information was totally outdated, it was incorrect, and it was unacceptable. And I read that this was much later, that a 2021 US study, it was almost 150,000 men, they had an average age of 75, that a diagnosis of dementia within the preceding 2 years increased the risk of attempted suicide by 44%, and a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, MCI, that's pre-dementia. Some people go on to develop dementia, some don't. But even just MCI raised the number of suicide attempts by 73%. And this is a failing of the medical profession to communicate effectively that this isn't doom and gloom, that there is so much we can do. So that's why I believe we need to educate health providers that just because something doesn't come in a pill doesn't mean it isn't powerful. We now know that sleep, stress management, food, exercise, all this, music, mental challenges, art, nature, social stimulation, all the things you speak to people about on this show, they're all potent medicine for our mind. And we now know we can slow progression of dementia and in many cases even reverse it through education, not medication.
That is so true. I have always felt, my mom lived with dementia for 30 years and they gasp and go, and they all say, oh, I'm so sorry that had to be so difficult. And yet it was probably some of the best times of my life. Yeah. It made me look at the world really different. It made me appreciate really simple things that I probably overlooked because I was too busy being busy. it taught me how to have deeper relationships and communicate on just these deeper levels. There was it taught me um, unconditional love at
Yes.
multiple levels as the disease progressed, which I didn't know existed, but I didn't really realize unconditional love until I got, had a child. I mean, there's just different kind of ping points, but there's so many more things that we can learn and dive deeper when we are truly connected, and getting me to slow down, because I'm kind of a type A personality.
Yeah, yes, I'm with you there.
Forced me to do that. My mom would say, Lori, you can put your phone down and you can turn off, when we had pagers, and you can turn off your pager and the world will still spin, honey. It'll be there when,
Yes.
when we're
Yes.
done. And I mean, I just grabbed a hold of those things, so tightly. And so it's amazing how the view of it is so doom and gloom. And
That's the media and the medical profession.
yep. And we trust our doctors. We assume
Mm-hmm.
that they know, you have all this education and stuff. And it's still like that today.
Yes.
We still are not getting the information out there that needs to be out there. So, let's talk a little bit more about medical school with you. So, what were you taught? I mean, was it even touched on? I mean, I know, like, for my folks, again, my mom's been gone 10 years. She lived with the 30. Her doctor, had been their doctor for 40 years. He didn't know anything. I mean, there was just, back then,
Yeah.
there really wasn't much of anything. But I hear from so many doctors now that, out of all of the education, it's still pretty minute.
It is minute. Unfortunately, doctors are taught only either drugs, surgery, radiation, or some other high-tech whiz-bang technology are methods of healing and curing and offering people relief. Medicine is still practicing Band-Aid solutions.
Mm-hmm.
They don't address root causes. I personally believe, looking back, that the role of modern medicine is to keep us alive long enough to allow us to reflect and really go into our own healing journey. Modern medicine buys us time, but it doesn't cure us. And with respect to dementia, they're all defined as neurodegenerative disorders, that they will progress and there's nothing you can do to slow it down, except perhaps today, lecanemab, donanemab, but they slow the progression of the disease to a very small amount in a small percentage of people. Very expensive. You need regular MRI scans, and there is a very high rate of side effects, including brain swelling and brain bleeding.
Yeah.
I learned more from you. No, I'm not kidding, because I started listening to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. And the two lessons from you actually that stand out are focus on what's strong, not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so powerful. Focus on the things he could still do and encourage those and praise those and really talk about those rather than talk about the things that he was no longer capable of doing. And the second one is facts fray, but feelings stay.
Mm-hmm.
That connecting through the heart, he didn't remember what we did the previous day or what we did that morning, but he remembered the emotional content of the experience. He remembered that we had a lovely time, that we were connected, that he was laughing and smiling. That he remembered, but he didn't remember the details of the experience. Those are things that we're just not taught in medical school. And the other thing too, we're not taught about the importance of our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, past traumas. If we have ongoing chronic stress in our lives, that, even an able-bodied person, for instance, when we're stressed, our performance goes down, we make poor decisions, we're just not thinking clearly. Stress is even more powerful when it comes to eroding brain function in somebody who has dementia, and the importance of minimizing stress in somebody's life. And we now know that if a person is bullied, it actually punches holes in the blood-brain barrier. That's the blood vessel lining that protects the heart from incoming toxins, that is weakened if somebody is socially isolated and especially has bad relationships and is feeling unsupported.
Well, and it makes sense. I mean, we all know how important it is to feel purposeful. We know what it feels like to belong or to be isolated or ostracized. And it has a huge, huge effect on us. And one of the things I think too is, there's so much misdiagnosis. The first thing that the doctors go to is, well, you're depressed. So
yes.
take a pill for this, because that's what they told my mom. Well, you're depressed. Well, you know what? If you were having her symptoms too, you would be too, when no one can identify what's going on. And so, when people finally get a diagnosis, families sometimes don't want it because of the stigma attached to it, because of the fear. But the people with dementia that I talk to around the world go, I was relieved because they were making me feel crazy. Like I was nuts. Like none of this was really happening. And it's so hard too with this disease when, they have their good moments and their bad moments. And like any of us, if we're going to an event, we kind of step into the moment. Even if we don't feel good, we kind of pull it together, and then we go in our car and melt and on the drive home and stuff. They do the same thing. And so then families kind of bicker over, and friends, well, they look fine. Well, sometimes they're in environments where they're just reminiscing. And so it's old stuff that comes easy.
Yes.
Comfortable environment. All of that stuff matters. And yet the doctors don't seem to understand that. And it's not being filtered out. Is there educational programs that are mandated for physicians nowadays? And I'm sure it's different in Australia than the US. That are specific, that have to be taken?
With relation to dementia?
Yeah.
I don't know, because I haven't specifically asked medical students, but I do train medical students when they come to my clinic, as a mentor. But from my understanding is their education is still woefully lacking, and there is still too much of brushing things away as, yes, but what do you expect? You're just getting old. There's a doctor joke that goes, an 85-year-old man goes to his doctor and he says, look, my right knee is really sore. Can you please, tell me what's going on? And the doctor says, you're 85. What do you expect? Of course your right knee is going to be sore. It's age. And he says, but doctor, my left knee is also 85 years old and it is perfectly fine and not giving me any trouble. So it's not just my age.
Oh, good point. I love that.
I love that too. So I still think, no, from what I can see, there still isn't enough education. You have to go out of your way and do separate courses and further education and have a special interest to educate yourself about dementia.
Yeah. And so much of what I see is still kind of medical model. It's not real life.
No.
It's like, this is the definition. These are the symptoms. But again, like you said, they're not getting to the root cause. And not only the root cause, but the root effect of those symptoms and how that plays out in somebody's life. I mean, that's what families want to know. How do I live graciously with this? How do we deal with this symptom?
Yes.
And in what I'm seeing now, it seems like there's a continued push of, let's get them diagnosed early. There's a blood test with blah, 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 blah. But nobody is talking about, how's that going to affect their insurance? How's that going to affect their work? How's that going to affect their driving? What's going to happen in the future because you want to give a pill that we don't even know is all that effective?
It's not. I'm sorry. It's just not.
Yeah. Well, my mom was on, I'm trying to think what they called it back in the day. It was like one of the first, medications. And we got to the point of, does she still need to be on it? And they're like, well, we don't really know if it's working or not. But if we take her off, and it is, we can put her back on, but she'll never come back to where she was. So we just kind of kept her on it. But it's like, that's not a reason to take it, to not know if it's working or not. I mean, it just seems like there should be some kind of measure to know if something's working or if it's really kind of a placebo in your body type thing.
There really isn't a way of knowing, but what we do know is that let's just take one thing, physical exercise is more powerful than a pill. That when a 30-minute brisk walk a day does more than any of the new whiz-bang drugs on the market that are now being prescribed for Alzheimer's. It actually increases the size, this is physical exercise, of the hippocampus, which is the learning and memory warehouse of the brain. It actually improves cognition in people with the ApoE4 gene, which increases your risk. Doesn't mean you'll necessarily get it, but it does increase your risk somewhat. If they exercise regularly, they bring their risk back down to what it would be without the gene.
Wow.
Why aren't there headlines saying everybody go out there and go for a brisk, or you can be a walk, a cycle, a dance a day keeps dementia away. That's another one of my sound bites. These things are more powerful, but because the medical profession isn't pushing it, people underestimate the power and the importance of physical exercise. The second one, another one is every soft drink is a bullet to our brain. Sugar, in that, drinking a soft drink delivers a very rapid, high amount of sugar to our brain. And the sugar is actually toxic, particularly, sugar, if I can diverge for a little bit just to explain to people, and I want to dive into this because between sugar and exercise, we could probably halve the number of people getting Alzheimer's just from those two things. Sugar is a molecule called sucrose, and it's made up of two smaller molecules called fructose and glucose. Now, when you give rats fructose, they perform worse in mazes. They behave as though they're drunk. So, and what fructose does is actually deplete brain cells of energy, because the brain cells take it in, they have to break it down. In the process, in the chemical reactions, the brain produces uric acid. It causes stress on the mitochondria. It increases inflammation, oxidative damage, for those listeners who are aware of these things. All these things contribute to Alzheimer's. But the key is it drains the brain cells of energy. That is a hallmark of Alzheimer's, not having enough energy in the brain. So if we quit all sugary beverages, that would certainly reduce the number of cases. And added to that, quit refined starches which contain the molecule glucose, which glucose is a good fuel for the brain. However, in Alzheimer's and dementia, the brain is not able to use glucose as effectively as it used to. The machinery to use glucose isn't functioning properly, so there's no point feeding ourselves glucose anymore. So quitting sugary beverages, refined starches, white bread, no pasta, rice, all of those things now are not giving the brain the energy it needs. So we need to focus more on proteins and healthy fats. I'll leave it at that. But if the media and the doctors emphasize the importance of just physical exercise and a healthy diet, and a lot of, making sure we eat enough omega-3 fatty acids in oily fish, in chia seeds, flaxseed oil, soybeans, dark leafy greens. If we made more of this, people would pay more attention to what they're eating. But because it's not emphasized by the medical profession, people don't realize just how important it is.
Well, and it's not taught from a young age. And here I'm dying to ask you this question. So, you're from Australia, in the US, and I hear this from people across the pond all the time. My gosh, the portion size of your meals here are huge. Yes. Everything from if it's coffee or tea or yes, a snack or an entree. And I just hear that repeatedly, like, oh my gosh. And and everything just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then we keep getting bigger and bigger and wonder why, we have issues with obesity and the inflammation and it just all yes, rolls together there. So did you notice the difference in our food?
I do. Your portion sizes do tend to be bigger, definitely. It's great. I always take half of it back to the hotel room and have it for lunch the next day. So, and the other thing that you mentioned, midlife obesity and type 2 diabetes both independently double the risk of dementia. So these are two really important midlife issues to address. And by obesity, I mean waist circumference don't worry about your weight, worry about your waist circumference. A woman with a waist circumference more than, it's going to be Australian metric, so you'll have to convert it, 80 centimetres for women and more than 94 centimetres for men, that starts to increase your risk of dementia. Now, it doesn't mean that at 81 centimetres you're doomed. It just means that starts to increase your risk, and you need to engage in measures to reduce that risk, which is why I wrote my other book, Neuroslimming, Let Your Brain Change Your Body. And I do focus on why and how we eat rather than what we eat, and being more mindful. But yeah, and type 2 diabetes, that's an issue of excessive sugar and refined starches.
Yeah, and that's just off the charts.
Yes.
For sure. What are some of the most important lessons that you learned from your dad during this journey?
I think the first thing he taught me was that dementia is a starting point, not an end point. Mm-hmm. Because for Dad, it was actually a doorway to a more active, meaningful, joyful, socially connected life. At the age of 80, I bought him his first ever gym membership, and we started going to the gym together. And I can tell you now that going to the gym not only improved his aerobic capacity, his fitness, his strength, but it also improved his cognition. When I had other carers come in to help or people to take him out, they would always know, your dad was particularly bright and engaged today. I'll bet you did some exercise this morning. So it definitely improved his cognition in the moment and also long term. But I think the most important thing he taught me was to maintain his sense of meaning and purpose. Give your brain a reason to stay sharp, and it more likely will. Dad so wanted to contribute to his fellow person, so we started volunteering with Meals on Wheels. Do you also have that organisation here in the US?
Yes, we definitely do.
Okay. And so we were the dad and daughter team. I was the driver. He was what we call the runner. He would deliver the food. And just that social interaction was positive. And and for some people, what broke my heart, we were their only social contact for the day. And, that loneliness massively increases the risk of dementia. But he would come back on a helper's high. And there have actually been studies to show that volunteering changes the structure of our brain. Again, it was a study in the US. It was women over the age of 50. They'd all started to show signs of memory decline. And so they were offered the opportunity to do 3 months volunteer work at a local primary school. And before they did that, they did MRI scans of their brain, and they tested their memory and their problem-solving skills. 3 months later, some of them had done the volunteering and some of them had not. They retested the women. Those who had done the volunteer work, they actually saw on MRI scans there was increased blood flow to the frontal lobes, which are our higher centres of intelligence, the important parts that help us make good decisions and coordinate a lot of other things in our brain. And they scored better in memory tests. And they were reporting they felt better, their quality of life had improved, and they noticed themselves that their memory had improved. This was volunteer work. Again, this is more powerful than drugs. Why aren't there headlines telling people, it's never too late to make a positive difference? There's always something we can do to improve a situation for others and for ourselves. When we give to others, we give to ourselves. Go out that you can make a difference, even with dementia. You just have to find, what it is that you're still passionate about that you can do. The other thing Dad taught me is we are not victims of our diagnosis, nor our genes, our past, or our circumstances. It's our day-to-day choices and habits and thoughts and beliefs and the amount of joy we have in our life that determine our prognosis and our quality of life. It's not the cards you're dealt, it's how you play them. And I think personally, a really big lesson for me was that I can't control everything, and nor am I meant to. The hardest lesson I learned was that what Dad needed most was simply for me to be fully present with him, not necessarily doing anything, fussing, making sure he had the perfect diet, not being distracted, not thinking about something else, not playing with my phone, but just being there, listening, getting attuned to what was going on for him, and being a calm, loving, non-critical presence. Because the greatest gift we can give to anyone is to allow them to feel heard and accepted as they are, to feel valued. That was all he needed. You know, all the things I did with him were secondary to making him feel emotionally safe and being a kind and loving presence. And to do that, we can't do it. I couldn't do it all alone. I learned to ask for help and to also be very specific about what I needed. You know, I'd ask friends or neighbours. I was very, very lucky that I had fabulous friends and neighbours who were able to support me. And later I had paid carers. But, you know, in the beginning, I'd just ask a friend, you know, people would say, you know, can I help you? And unless you're specific, they don't know what to do, or they're embarrassed to ask you because they don't want to imply that you're not coping. So I would say, look, can you just come and sit with Dad and play dominoes with him for an hour so that I can get some work done? Or can you take him to the Japanese garden so that I can get just some time to myself?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be specific, and you've got to ask for help, and you've got to realize that people want to help. It's not an imposition. Yeah, I'm not asking them to spend a week looking after him. I'm just asking for an hour here or there. Yeah. And I think the other thing too, joy is healing. My role was to bring as much joy into his life as possible. It was more important to have peaceful meal times than to insist he ate his broccoli. You know, the warm, calming, peaceful attitude we bring to everything we do is more important than the actual doing. And especially, I think that people with dementia, and you've spoken about this in regard to your mum, they're particularly attuned to other people's mood and energy, even if I hide how I'm feeling. If I'm agitated, even if I used to try and fake feeling calm, he would pick up on my agitation and he would get anxious himself. He would start pacing. He would get sundowning. So it isn't a cliche that we need to prioritize self-care, because self-care allows us to give more. Yeah. There's another interesting, funny thing I heard. How do you know if someone is practicing self-care? You know, they light up a room when they walk into it. How do you know when someone's not practicing self-care? They light up when they walk out of it.
Yep. Yep. And we all feel that energy of what someone's doing. Gosh, you touched on so many things. One of them was about, you know, feeling purposeful. And I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of organizations that really support that. One is Dementia Action Alliance, known as daanow.org. But they run their own radio show. They write cards to one another if someone is having a tough time or a birthday. They have different groups, from support groups to coloring groups to all different types of things. They have a speakers bureau where they get out, and there's many of these organizations out there, but people don't know about them. And to me, that is sinful. And that's one of the first things that you know, I believe doctors should be passing out, but I know that there's like a wall of resources, or probably a file on a computer nowadays, that never see the light of day because they don't know enough about them. But I think it would change the doctor's presence and feeling about the disease to know that these things would help. I think it would change the way the diagnosis was given. You know, because here there was a study that showed 50% of the people that have a diagnosis weren't even told. The doctors didn't even tell them because they don't know what to do.
Yes.
And it's like, well, that's kind of shameful. What are we going to the doctor for if we're not going to be told? You know, that it's just a medical record that someone else is going to have that data to. And, you know, it just allows us choices of being able to search out, you know, things. There's also another, we have a dementia-friendly group here in Colorado called Dementia Together that's absolutely phenomenal. And they've done studies with people going to, I want to say, concerts and things, and they screen them before and they screen them after, and they've just been shocked at the difference from people getting out in community and,
Yes.
being part of, along with many different support groups and things, that, you said joy is healing. We all know that in our core. Joy feels good and stress doesn't. And you had touched on the whole stress piece too. In my Dementia in the Arts program, every single person we interview says the same thing. When I am doing my art, I'm in the zone.
Yes.
My care partner has to sometimes yank me away because I am so in tune. I am so comfortable. I'm so relaxed. I'm feeling purposeful. And, that's what we all want in this life. And then the last thing I'll mention of what you talked about was, again, getting back to that whole purpose. Your dad said, this isn't the end, this is the beginning. And people who really are looking for answers, because some will curl up in a ball and just believe the stigma.
Yeah.
It's really sad. But those that are out there really getting connected, all talk about how purposeful they feel, and that many of them will say, I've never felt this purposeful in my whole entire life.
Yes.
Because there hasn't been space to volunteer. There hasn't been time to do these things. And now that other things have been stripped away, which is sad, like your work and in different things, you can fill that with something else.
Yes.
And it can be amazing what you can do, not only for yourself, but for others. Oh, and I lied. There was one other thing I wanted to touch on. When you talked about helping, having friends come in and help. And this makes me giggle because I did not really allow people in the circle. I wanted to control it. I had it under control. I didn't want things to get thrown for a loop, by some people who did things differently, and then I would have to kind of recorrect and remaneuver, and I didn't have time for that. But the thing that I missed, and like I said, it cracks me up looking at it now, is we all know how good it feels to help somebody else.
Yes.
And by blocking that, we're denying people that ability to feel good about helping out a friend. And we're denying the person we're caring for to have another interaction that's positive.
Yes.
But we don't see that, most of us. I don't think.
No.
Because we don't talk about that stuff. And
Absolutely.
it's very important. We are going to just take a quick break here, and we're going to hear about Q for Good, which is a website that just does miraculous things for companies that are really authentic and socially engaged. And I use them myself. They're wonderful. So we're going to hear about them. But before we do that, I just want to let everybody know that you're going to be able to get a hold of Dr. Helena through our show notes. We have, she's got a couple of websites. She's on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn. So she's easily accessible for you to be able to find. So we'll be right back after we hear about Q for Good. I also want to introduce you all to Q Blocks. They have been absolutely excellent to deal with. They have been in business for 18 years and they serve the globe. I can't say enough good things about this company. I've had a lot of bad experiences. I don't know about you with tech companies. They have made a very complicated process very easy. And their staff is so kind, so polite, so respectful to work with. And, when I am frustrated and ready to pull my hair out, they just smile and tell me everything's going to be okay. And they really are just on top of the communication, which alleviates so much stress as an owner when you're dealing with tech issues. You can get a 10% discount. Visit them at QBlocks, that's QBlocks.com, or you can email them at letstalk@qblocks.com. For that 10% discount, just put Lori, Lori, in the inquiry form. And again, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I surely haven't been. I can't rave enough about this company. And that's kind of rare these days. I want to pick up this conversation. I just find it fascinating. I love your energy, the way you talk. I mean, you believe in what you're saying. And
100%.
and so often and I wouldn't say this with my guests because I think most of my guests are filled with passion as well. But there's so much out there in the media that is just words. It's just, this is
Mm.
what I'm supposed to say, or this is how I think I can bring money in. So these are the words I'm going to choose. And I can tell you are way past that. You really are here to make a difference. And I so appreciate and align with that because I think we all have that power to change the world in
Yes.
big or small fashions. And some people, I think, will look at a person like you or me and go, well, I couldn't do what they're doing. You don't have to. You
That's
don't have to, but you can share this episode and let other people know about it. And that is powerful.
Mm.
You can repeat one or two nuggets that you've heard, and store those in your brain for resource for later, when someone's going to need it. And maybe it'll be you, maybe it'll be a loved one, maybe it'll be a stranger. But, it's about, again, keeping your mind active, keeping you learning and expanding how to make this world a better place, and never doubting that you matter and that you are loaded with information.
Yes.
You might be 10 steps behind somebody else, but you're 20 steps ahead of somebody too.
Yes.
And so it's getting that pendulum to swing evenly instead of, thinking you're less than, because everybody, in my mind, all of us are equal. We just have different gifts. We do it in different ways. And that goes for a person with dementia as well.
Yes. There's a quote attributed to Einstein,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, everyone is a genius, but if you ask a fish to climb a tree, it will think that it's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to find out what it is that you've got to find, your genius.
Yep.
Not how smart am I? It's how am I smart?
Yep.
And I just want to touch on two things that we've been talking about. One is all doctors are doing their best. They do want to make a difference. It's purely the system that drains their time and energy and doesn't educate them effectively. So it's not that a doctor doesn't want to know or doesn't want to help or is just mindlessly prescribing drugs. It's that's all that we are taught. You've actually got to, I can't see patients 5-6 days a week. I have to restrict my practice to no more than 3 days a week to give me time to keep up with the research. So I'm in a very lucky position that I've made that decision and I can do that. But not all doctors can. So I just want to make the point, you've got to go out of your way to educate yourself. Otherwise, you're just a cog in the wheel and you don't know that there's another way to practice medicine. And secondly, we talked about meaning and purpose. It doesn't have to be, some people go, well, I could never advocate for because a lot of people go into advocacy or education but it doesn't have to be anything major. Ellen Langer is a famous US psychologist at Stanford, and she did a study of people living in an aged care residence, and they just randomly chose they had 2 floors. So one floor, then all the floors everyone got a pot plant in their room. Now one floor, all the nursing staff would look after, they chose the pot plant, they looked after the pot plant, but they had a pot plant in their room. And
I have to define, because now that marijuana is legal, a pot plant or a potted plant?
Oh no, it was a flower. It was a pretty flower for their room.
Okay.
Joy and nature. So one of them was looked after by the staff, and the other floor of residents, they got to choose their plant, and they were told, you're responsible for this. You have to water it, look after it. You decide where you want to put it. That was the only difference. They were also given a bit more choice, that's right, about, whether they wanted to watch movie A or movie B, whether they wanted to eat indoors or outdoors. They got a few more choices, but otherwise they all received the same food and the same entertainment and the same kind of plant. After a year, those that had been looking after their own plant were, I don't know the exact numbers, but were much more likely to be alive, had better cognition, their health was better, physical, mental, emotional. They were less likely to have developed Alzheimer's. Everything they were measured on was better. And the only difference was they had responsibility looking after this plant. Even something as small as that, and making a few decisions about how they went about their lives.
Well, and not only were they responsible, but they were told they were capable.
Yes. Great point. Great.
Because so often we just strip that up. Or like with the other one, we just take it over. We just, don't even imagine that they could be responsible for that. And
Yes.
it doesn't even have to be in words, but it can be in our actions. And that's where I think that, to me, some of the biggest benefits for me personally with my mom having dementia was me looking inward on how am I reacting and how am I coming off. And some days I do much better than others,
Yes.
but at least I know to look now.
Yes.
I know that these are important factors, and multisensory communication is critical, where I didn't really, I probably knew it, but I didn't necessarily value it in the heightened awareness that I have now, and in terms of how important it is. Or like when you said with your when you were explaining about how we can try to hide or mask our feelings, but your dad would recognize those things. And so often people think, well, a person with dementia is not capable of processing that, and it's kind of like a no-brainer. It's just one of those things we've done all of our life. It goes pilot. And what they have always told me is that they're kind of like when someone is blind or has a deficit, the other senses pick up more. And that's what they say. Colors are more vivid. Sounds are louder. Everything they see is like popped. And knowing that, understanding that, appreciating that, and then again, giving them the responsibility and letting them know that they're totally capable of doing this.
Yes. There's another quote. I'll quote Ellen Langer, the psychologist. She says, don't help people to death. Our system tends to help people to death because we take over their decision making, everything, just because we think they've got to stay safe. No, they can't go outdoors because, the ground is uneven and they might fall, and it's just too much, too protective. But the second thing I just want to mention, because you talked about other senses being heightened, I recently went to, actually, it was only in March this year, April, I went to the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference in Krakow in Poland. And the most fascinating presentation there was about what we've discovered is that if you improve and stimulate a person's sense of smell, they've done several studies now and they're unequivocal, stimulating smell actually improves memory and cognition, because all our senses need to maintain stimulation. I mean, we now also know, midlife hearing loss, if you don't treat the hearing loss, is a big risk factor for dementia. So wear your hearing aids. I've got a whole chapter in my book about the difficulties I had in getting Dad to wear hearing aids. And I even had the hearing aid clinic. I got them to make me fake hearing aids so that Dad didn't feel different. So it would be one for me every morning, one for you, one for me, one for you. And I'd have to wander around with blocked ears for half an hour until he got used to it. And then I'd pull mine out and he wouldn't see. But the point I want to make is loss of smell is probably one of the very earliest symptoms and signs of cognitive impairment. And if we can address that, we can actually slow that down, because our olfactory, that's what you call the cells responsible for smell, our nose, there's a direct sort of line straight into our brain, and it's also closely linked to our hippocampus, our memory. So don't neglect stimulating your smell. And, it wasn't did the experiments in various ways. In some studies, they had a diffuser of a different scent. When they went to sleep, they would put on this diffuser, so they'd have this scent going for 2 hours while they slept. And in other studies, they just gave them, say rosemary, rose, lemon. I can't remember the exact smells. And they would just smell for 20 seconds, these 7 different smells, morning and evening. And even that, just a few minutes a day, improved their memory and their cognition. So that was just an aside, but I think it's a really important one to remind people to stimulate all their senses in as many ways as they can.
Well, and it's so simple to do.
Yes,
aromatherapy isn't expensive. It's easy to do. I have my essential oils right on my bedside, so lavender when sleeping, and
that was another one, lavender.
Yeah, the roses, they say, is one of the highest frequencies, to get us balanced and calm, and lemon can pop us up and give us energy, and all of those types of things are really important to do. But we can do those by baking and cooking as well, or getting out in the garden. The dirt has a smell, or after rain, the worms, have their little odor to them. I mean, there's all kinds of different things. Going for a walk and just seeing things blossom, and unless you have really bad allergies, and then you're going to sneeze, sneeze a ton. But there's all different ways to do that. And I think sometimes we complicate it and think, oh, I can't do that. And it's like, you're doing it every day.
Yes.
Seeing those things and amplifying them, doing them a little bit more often and stuff. What kinds of activities did you find really special with your dad in order to help boost his brain? And what did he enjoy?
Music, number one, inspired by the documentary Alive Inside, which I recommend everybody watch. I played his favorite songs regularly because music is more powerful in triggering memories and emotions than our photos. And right at the top of the list, I have to put physical exercise, not just the walking, but strength training and balance training. I'll tell you the balance first. Whenever we were standing in a queue somewhere, we would practice standing on one leg, because there's a part of the brain called the cerebellum. It's a small part of the brain, sits at the back of our brain, and it is responsible for coordinating our movement and balance, but also responsible for regulating our thoughts and emotions. So strengthening our cerebellum through balance also improves our mental health and improves neurodegenerative diseases, because we found that people who have stress, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, dementia, their balance is worse. And when you improve their balance, you improve their brain function. And I know people would think we were mad because we'd just be laughing, trying to balance on one leg, first on one leg, then on the other. But it was making a positive difference. And the goal is to be able to stand at least 30 seconds on each, one leg at a time, 30 to 60 seconds, and with your eyes closed, because that adds an extra layer of challenge. So again, cost-free and can make a positive difference. And the second thing that was really important that not many people realize is maintaining physical strength. From about our mid-30s onwards, we lose about 5% of our muscle mass every decade. So if you do the maths, from our mid-30s to our mid-70s, we can lose 1/5 of our muscles and our strength. Now, why does this matter? I'm sure you've heard of the communication between our gut and our brain. It's all over the headlines. Look after your gut and you're looking after your brain. Our muscles also communicate with our brain. Whenever we move our muscles, strengthen our muscles, engage in any sort of resistance training, our muscles release hundreds of chemicals called myokines, which circulate through our blood and keep all our organs healthy, including our brain. And what we found is that hand grip strength, I test their hand grip strength. It's very easy. And because the strength of our hands, assuming you haven't had a recent hand injury, reflects our overall muscle strength, and our muscle strength reflects the strength of our mind. Strong muscles equate to a strong mind. And when our muscles weaken, so does our brain function. So, I would have Dad, lifting, we had some weights at home. We would go to the gym, we'd use the machines. You know, if you can afford a gym membership and a personal trainer, that's fantastic. But you can still do things at home. Try and do push-ups against a wall. You know, Google strength training using body weight. And there's hundreds, thousands of exercises that you can do at home without any equipment that will still help strengthen your muscles. You know, he used to want to do it and I used to allow him. He used to always want to push the trolley at the supermarket. He would want to carry the groceries. And I know that people would look at me and think, what a lazy princess she is, allowing her poor father to carry the groceries. But it was to maintain his strength. So I just had to put up with the nasty glares.
Well, it's maintaining the strength and giving him purpose, because he's helping in the process too. Yeah.
Yes.
That people aren't understanding. Well, I can tell, I'm 65 and I'm overweight and I don't exercise, near, and I can feel the difference in my strength. And just talking with you, it's just like, okay, she's getting me on track here, because it just makes so much sense there. I wanted to talk to you about, your first book here that you wrote, In Search of My Father. What got you to write the book? Because this isn't a small book. It's very detailed and it's really easy to read. It's just designed beautifully, but there's a lot of information. I don't think most people understand how much time it takes to write a book. And so what got you to say, I need to do this, and then actually finish it and get it out there?
Well, in the evenings, finally when, because Dad would go to bed quite early, that would be my time. And I would send emails to my friends regaling Dad and my stories. And that was just my way of processing what had happened and just dealing with things and coming up with new ideas to solve problems. And after a while, my friends started saying I should put my experiences in a book because, one, they found them entertaining, and secondly, that it would be very helpful for others going through the same experience. And I love writing, so it wasn't a chore at all. I really enjoy the process. That's my creative outlet. And I also realized that there is a huge need for people to understand that there are so many things we could do to slow progression of dementia, if not halt it altogether. All the things I did with Dad that I've been talking about kept him stable until he passed away in his sleep at the age of 87. That was 12 years after his diagnosis. And he could still remember me, dress and shower himself, feed himself, and communicate coherently with others. Yes, he repeated himself. He was extremely forgetful. He couldn't plan or organize his life, but he maintained that meaning and purpose, which was the whole point of life. So I wanted to get the message out there that regardless of our age or stage of life, we can take steps to defy dementia and build a better brain. And I wanted our healthcare system, I wanted people in healthcare to read it too, to start to acknowledge that our emotional life is just as important to our health as diet, exercise, drugs, and surgery. The medical system doesn't even pay enough attention to diet and exercise, let alone thoughts and emotions and past traumas. And these things impact our physical and mental health more deeply than physical factors. So the book is part personal diary, part scientific research, and part practical guide. And most importantly, I wove it together with humorous stories so that it isn't a heavy or difficult read. I have so many people say, I didn't want to read it, but somebody said, because I didn't want to read about something depressing like dementia, because it's, the tagline is dementia is no match for daughter's determination. And after they read it, it was like, oh, I'm so glad I did, because it wasn't heavy. So many people say that they laugh out loud when they read about my bungles and Dad's sharp sense of humor, which he also retained until the end. And, facts inform, but stories transform. The facts in the book change people's thinking, but I think it's the stories that have the potential to change people's lives. And that's why what you do is also so powerful.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in storytelling. I call it emotional-based training. I don't think people truly change until they feel the need. They'll memorize something if they need it for a test, but it's not going to stick with them. But if there's a story and they can truly feel the emotion of it, it just it's like super glue, that's kind of how I look at it. And it lowers that level of people feeling like, is it repeatable? Because it's just a story. It's not
Yes,
facts. I don't have to get everything exactly right.
yes,
I still get the crux of the story, even if I misspoke here or there. I can still get the meaning across. And
yes.
and so it's just a lighter way of communicating. Plus, it's a real example that you're giving that
Mm,
so often isn't talked about, and you're putting it in a different light. You're kind of shifting from that mindset to a heart set, and
yes,
getting people to view things differently, which I think is
yes.
so important. How did you pick the title, In Search of My Father? Where did that come from? I'm always fascinated by titles and by covers. And I love this cover, that you have for your book here. I just think it's wonderful with your dad and the clock and things changing there. So how did you come about picking the title?
I was in search of my father. It just came naturally because I realized that my journey was searching for the man beyond the grief, beyond the despair, beyond the depression, beyond the dementia. I was looking for the core of him, which I think our core remains unchanged. I was searching, and I was also searching for the loving bond we'd had when I was a child, and which I hadn't noticed had eroded over the decades because I'd been living such a long way from my parents. So a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you were searching for love. It's a love story." And I thought, okay, that wasn't a conscious intention, but I can see that it was,
Yeah.
that it is. It's a story of love.
I know for me, with my journey with my mom, I always say she taught me how to play again, because
Yes,
I got rid of not all the control factors, but a lot of them, where I could just play. I could just really be present. And she did it in such a beautiful way. And it was, life transforming for me. And I just think, oh my gosh, this is how everyone needs to look at life and live their life. It's just so much deeper than this surface stuff and these
yes,
flashes in the pan, that trigger everybody. Those small little things, even like towards the end, a glint in the eye or a little giggle, can
yes.
just make a bad day good for me. I go back and I have on my YouTube channel, I have a couple of I don't know, there's probably a dozen or so little clips of my mom engaging in music. When she couldn't really speak anymore,
Mm,
but she would fall asleep, and then she'd wake up, and then she'd start singing with the guitarist and stuff, and then she would giggle, and then she'd fall asleep, and her hands would start going, and it was kind of like alive inside, that whole piece.
yes,
And like I said, when I'm having a really bad day, I go to YouTube and I watch one and go, okay, life isn't that bad, because
yes,
it brings me down to a simpler place. And there's just such beauty in the depth of our relationships if we allow ourselves to go there
yes, yes.
and really be connected. Well, this has just been such a great conversation. I so appreciate your time. For our listeners, I always ask you to be a giver of hope. Join our community, like, click, and share. Take some of the favorite phrases and utilize them, spread them. Go out and purchase her book. It's you're going to learn so much, and I know that you have from this conversation. But again, those likes, clicks, and shares, it doesn't cost you any money. It takes very little time, but it has a huge impact. And to me, there's nothing better than when someone's in need and I can pull something out of my bag of going, I just talked to somebody, or I just heard something, or let me find that for you. It makes me feel good, and it makes them feel heard and cared for at the same time. And it's so much better to be educated ahead of time,
Mm,
because we never know what life is going to bring us, and who we can help on that. Again, in the show notes, you'll have all the contact information there. And we're going to be doing a couple other shows with Dr. Helena, and we'll let you know when those come out as well. She's just a brilliant, brilliant person from the soul on out, and is touching so many people all around the globe. So again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. And people can go to my website, drhelenapopovic.com or Adventure Prevents Dementia, and sign up for my free weekly blog where I put out any new piece of information about dementia, about our health. I'll send it out, and it's for free, and it's, really helpful to people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. We'll talk soon. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Meredith from the Senior Fitness with Meredith podcast, where I discuss all things for seniors, from fitness, your health and wellness journeys, how to be all over strong and beyond. I also have my mini podcast called Motivation with Meredith. It's a great, quick motivational pick-me-up for your days. Join me, listen now, search for Senior Fitness with Meredith on your favorite podcast platform.